abortion was not at all a right to the many women who fought for real rights, like getting the vote or establishing full legal rights separate from a husband. Rather, quote, they refused to accept the patriarchal dictum that their own physiology in and of itself was a barrier to public achievement. They put the blame on a society which refused to accommodate and authentically respect their reproductive potential, like all their other capacities. So I'm going to leave you to look at the Feminists for Life website on your own time. There's tons of material there, in particular about American early feminists. In Canada, Emily Murphy, the first woman police magistrate in the British Empire, was also against abortion. Quote, Murphy supported sex education and birth control, ridiculing religious arguments that promoted celibacy as a means of birth control on the grounds that the sole object of sex was procreation. However, she opposed abortion, which she viewed as murder in embryo, and would have permitted abortion only for those that were approved by a committee of doctors in cases of serious disease or insanity. My third practical point rests on the health outcomes, and the fact remains that health outcomes after abortion are not a woman's success story. There are risks associated with abortion. I find on the odd occasion that this comes up with friends. There's a general lack of information on what those could possibly be. We don't hear about those risks. And on the freedom of information front, I believe it is a grave injustice that medical reporters shy away from this topic. We hear about all kinds of studies. I remember one in particular a couple of years ago. It was front page in the Globe and Mail, and it talked about how if I turn on a light at night, it increases my risk of breast cancer. So I'm pretty much doomed because I do that every single night. But when studies show, so that went into that's front page in the Globe and Mail without too much scrutiny. I've never heard of that link since, so I wonder if it even holds in any capacity at all. But suddenly when abortion is the topic, the desperate search for flaws begins. And don't get me wrong, I don't want bad information out there. I would like this high level of scrutiny to be applied to all studies. But there is definitely a special kind of hypocrisy in the media when turning on a light at night makes front page news. But abortion-related studies consistently fall to the cutting room floor. And by the way, you can definitely and absolutely maintain, and some do and are public about it, you can maintain your pro-choice status and still understand negative health repercussions. One recent study confirmed prior studies showing that one health risk of abortion is actually the preterm delivery of your first wanted pregnancy. So after the abortion is done and over, there's a risk of your first wanted pregnancy being delivered early, which carries with it risk for the baby of cerebral palsy, among other things. Now, as it turns out, I don't know that any of you had heard about this. It was reported in the UK press quite a lot. That's where I learned about it. But it turns out that this study was done where? In Toronto at Mount Sinai Hospital, and it was funded by our very own Canadian Institute of Health Research, and as far as I know, it was never reported in Canada. So there are physical risks. There are other people, doctors in particular. We have one doctor at Pro Woman Pro Life who are better prepared to talk about the health risks. I have done some work on the mental health risks associated with abortion. And for one of the pieces that I wrote, I recall speaking with a psychologist in New Zealand, the author of 2 studies, Dr. David Ferguson. And he told me that he was concerned that in New Zealand they have, I suppose, a rule or a law that women are granted abortion on mental health grounds. And he is concerned that they are actually causing poor mental health effects for women, the result of granting abortions. He maintains this pro-choice political positioning and still says this about his research. And my point in all this is not to dissuade women from having abortions because they might get breast cancer or they might suffer depression. I think that might rightly be called fear-mongering, and it certainly is mixing issues. I say don't have an abortion because we don't kill to solve our problems. But the end effect of our abortion culture is a poor level of health for women. And not every woman will experience negative side effects, be it mental or physical. But the mere fact that we do know abortion is correlated with negative health outcomes means we do have some walking wounded among us. They're mostly women, but not always, and some men will be quite open about the pain they've experienced. We have those women walking around us. A woman who starts taking drugs because she can't cope with an abortion is not empowered. And a woman who starts drinking heavily because she can't cope after an abortion is not empowered. And the woman who experiences the trauma of an early term birth with her first wanted pregnancy and all the side effects that that brings is likewise not empowered. Point 4 is regarding sex selection abortion, another practical reason why being pro-life is a pro-woman stand. This isn't disputed anywhere so far as I can see, and beyond theorizing about women's rights, on the ground, access to abortion means globally missing women. There's a demographer by the name of Nicholas Aberstadt. He wrote a piece and presented at the United Nations. It's called The Global War Against Baby Girls, and he points to this phenomenon in places like Luxembourg and Macedonia, forget about China and India, which is where we hear about it more often. I personally quantified this trend in certain Canadian communities where there are higher immigrant populations from India and China. So this is definitely known to occur on Canadian soil, but a pro-abortion culture and one that prioritizes choice over and above just about everything else can do very, very little about it. My 5th point is that when we make abortion available, it harms all women and not just those who choose it. When we make abortion available, it harms all women and not just those who choose it. And this gets a little bit more philosophical, but access to abortion has significantly altered the way we view women, women's bodies, and the nature of pregnancy. And I swear to you, I had this idea before I read the article in First Things by Richard Stith, but he summed this up quite nicely, and so I read it and thought, I'm better off quoting heavily from this because he's a Yale professor with a PhD. So he says, sex no longer causes birth. Given the availability of elective abortion, sex can only cause choice, and it is choice that causes birth. And that holds true for every woman across the country, irrespective of whether or not she would make that choice. So every single woman falls subject to what I call a choice regime. And some of the consequences of this are the following, and these are things he outlines in his article. Male responsibility really does end at conception because mothers alone determine whether children will exist. Changes the very nature of responsibility and allows women and men to think at least there's some way out if the unlikely happens and pregnancy occurs. If a woman chooses birth, not abortion, the child's father may push her away, and the fear that might have previously been focused on sex itself and now turns to getting the woman to have an abortion. And so there is also that coercive element. And that leads me to a side note on this idea that women freely choose abortion that can be contested from almost every angle. There's researchers who attempt to estimate the percentage of women who feel pressured into their abortions. Frederica Matthews Green has written a book called Real Choices, and she identifies that women almost always abort to satisfy the desires of people around them who do not want to care for their children, or her children. There's even a pro-choice feminist by the name of Carol Gilligan who wrote a book called In a Different Voice, Psychological Theory in Women's Development. And she writes there that women often made choices to abort against their own maternal desires or moral beliefs in order to satisfy and please other people. Some of those influences might be family or boyfriends. And you may counter that a woman could just as easily be pressured into keeping a child, but pro-lifers are not the ones out there advocating day and night that abortion is a woman's choice and a woman's choice alone and it's her choice. There's certain hypocrisy in a movement that declares abortion to be a choice at the sole discretion of the woman, knowing full well that that does not happen in most cases. Today, women simply cannot expect that men will be happy to have a child and or pay support, be active in the child's life, or be entirely excluded, all based unilaterally on the choice of the mother.